Have you ever had dreams so vivid that upon waking in the middle of the night, it takes you a few minutes to determine if it was real or just a dream? Unfortunately, I am all too familiar with this experience. For the past month, nearly every night my mind has been replaying the same scene. Not one of the happiest moments of my life. I must confess, it wore me down to the point that I was ready to seek help from a psychologist. But my friends talked me out of that idea just in time, suggesting a much simpler solution: to pour my heart out not to a specialist, but to paper by writing a story about it. Well, I suppose I should start with an introduction. My name is Gena, and I live in a small provincial town whose name wouldn't mean anything to you. This is where I was born, spent my childhood, and after 9th grade decided not to move away and enrolled in a local college to learn a trade. The years spent in this city were filled with many bright moments. Together with friends, we explored the surroundings, swam in the river, played tag near the school and rode our bikes through all the streets. However, there were also some unpleasant situations. The thing is, right across from my house, in a dilapidated 5-story building, lived an eternally dissatisfied old woman whom the whole neighborhood simply called Baba Valya. As long as I can remember, she was always arguing with someone and avoided people. We, the ordinary kids, got the worst of it. We tried not to even look in her direction so as not to accidentally anger the old woman. There were times when my best friend Lenya and I would be sitting peacefully in the sandbox, enthusiastically building the city of our dreams. And suddenly a stream of icy water from a bucket would pour down on us. Screaming, we would run away to the sarcastic laughter of Baba Valya. No matter how much our parents tried to reason with her, no matter how much they threatened to call the police, nothing helped. She would only shower everyone with curses and hide in her apartment. Another prank, and it would start all over again. In the end, the adults gave up on the useless arguments and simply forbade us to get involved with the crazy old woman, although there were plenty of other places to play. You could endlessly list the nasty acts of this woman, of which there were many in my memory. But the events I am going to talk about didn't happen in childhood, but much later. Lenya and I were already in our 2nd year at the same college. It was a hot summer, July. Having finished a difficult academic year, we planned to spend the entire vacation sitting at our computers, occasionally going out into the city in search of adventure. By a happy coincidence, my parents had just left on vacation to the seaside that month. I wasn't a fan of the scorching sun and salty water, so I was happy to stay alone for 2 weeks. The apartment was completely under my control during this time. I could play my favorite online games without restrictions and stay out late. What's wrong with that pastime? But everything went wrong one fateful evening. My friend and I again stayed up late at the computer in fruitless attempts to take top 1 among the same hardcore gamers. Sometime around 1 in the morning, tired and irritated, I decided to take a little break. I wanted to go out for some fresh air, smoke a cigarette and calm my nerves. Usually I tried to do this discreetly so that the vigilant neighbors wouldn't accidentally notice and report to my folks that their son smokes. But once my dad caught me, and since then my bad habit was legalized. And so, standing on the porch of the entrance, slowly inhaling the blue smoke, I became so immersed in my thoughts that I didn't even notice anything around me. You know, I've always been impressed by the freshness of a summer night, especially after a sweltering day when the temperature exceeds 30 and the sunset is perceived as a long-awaited sip of cool moisture in the middle of the desert. In general, I got tremendous pleasure from it. But sooner or later everything comes to an end. Having finished my cigarette and flicking the butt into a rusty tin can, I was about to go back in. I felt that my friend was slowly starting to get annoyed by my long absence. But suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I caught some movement near one of the entrances in the house opposite. I was wildly curious about who needed to go outside at such a late hour. Our courtyard was always deathly quiet at night, only occasionally disturbed by the barking of stray dogs chasing each other. I quickly ran into the entrance, leaving the front door ajar, and began to closely observe through a narrow crack. At that moment, I was ready to see anyone but her. Looking around strangely, that same Baba Valya came out of the house, holding a bucket that was obviously filled to the brim in her hands. After standing for a while and making sure there was no one around, the old woman set the heavy container on the ground and began to furiously fiddle with the lock on the massive door leading to the basement. Literally a couple of minutes later, having successfully dealt with the lock, the neighbor picked up the bucket as if nothing had happened and, after looking around once more, disappeared into the dark room. That evening, I was unable to find an answer to the question of what this strange woman was doing in the basement at such a late hour. However, I didn't attach much importance to what had happened, knowing from childhood that my restless neighbor always had a complete set of quirks. Having thrown this misunderstanding out of my head, I went to my cozy apartment with a clear conscience, mentally preparing for another swim in the world of gaming. The whole next day passed lazily and boringly, as usual. For the most part, Lenya and I wandered aimlessly through the streets of our hometown in search of at least some entertainment. Those who live in small towns will understand me perfectly now. It was only around 6 in the evening, hungry and tired, that we went our separate ways to prepare for another gaming marathon until late at night. I practically killed the whole evening cooking dinner and, I'll be honest, I didn't even suspect how difficult it could be. For a moment, I was imbued with the hard housework of our mothers, remembering how my parent would spend half a day at the stove on any holiday, trying to treat the family and guests with all kinds of goodies. Night crept up unnoticed. Lenya and I were still selflessly fighting in virtual battles, defending the honor of our small team. But soon my bad habit, as if on a schedule, made itself felt, and I again decided to take a little smoke break in order to at least briefly tear myself away from the monitor. Going out on the porch and lighting a cigarette, I again began to enjoy the coolness of the summer night. However, today this pleasure did not last as long as I would have liked. At about the same time as the day before, the same neighbor came out of the entrance with a bucket in her hands, only this time I decided not to hide, but bravely stay in place. After all, I am not little anymore, I reasoned to myself, watching the old woman's actions closely. Despite her advanced age, the woman noticed me in the very first second, barely leaving the entrance. Putting down the heavy bucket, she began to stare point blank in my direction. The wrinkled face of Baba Valya in the light of a street lamp looked rather creepy, and her angry look in every possible way hinted that I was clearly superfluous here. At some point, I just got tired of this meaningless staring contest, and I decided to get back to my cozy dwelling just in case, so as not to see this sinister look from childhood nightmares anymore. Having entered the apartment and connected to the network, I immediately decided to tell my friend about the suspicious nightly wanderings of our neighbor. Unlike me, Lenya had been in touch with me on Discord all this time and hadn't gone anywhere. "Hey buddy, are you there? Imagine what I just saw in our yard." "Well, come on, surprise me. What's so interesting there?" Lenya replied sarcastically, clearly letting me know that he had waited quite a while. "I am serious. I've been noticing some oddities with Baba Valya for the second night in a row. I just didn't tell you yesterday. I thought it was a one-time thing." My friend's voice changed a little as soon as he heard who it was about. "Imagine, she goes down to the basement in the middle of the night with a bucket. Yesterday I thought maybe she went for potatoes, but she drags this bucket as if she's carrying water from a well. And today the same picture, at the same time. Somehow it's all strange. No kidding. Listen, let's see what she's doing there at night. I am even curious. Maybe she's holding hostages? You out of your mind. It's scary to even approach her, let alone go down into a dark basement. No way, I am out. Don't be a wuss, Gena, it's a piece of cake. We'll go in quietly, look around the corner at what she's doing, and just as stealthily get out. Let's go. There's nothing else to do anyway. I am already sick of the same thing every day. I am tired of these dull vacations. At least we get some adrenaline rush. Lenya's words made me think for a few seconds. But really, whether outside or at home, it's dead boring, but at least we get some dose of adrenaline. Such a chance to find out, perhaps, one of the darkest secrets of the evil old woman, who literally hated everyone and everything, could not be missed. So why back down now? Okay, let's try, but very carefully. And so that she doesn't catch us. Otherwise I really don't want to make excuses to my parents later. That's my Jenka, up for any ruckus, except for a hunger strike. Just like when we were kids. Well, shall we meet at the entrance in 10 minutes and go for it? Damn, Len, are you a complete fool or just pretending? Where are we going to go now? What if Baba Valya catches us on the way out? We don't know if she's still there or not. Let's do it tomorrow night at the same time, okay? Well, okay, I agree. Tomorrow is tomorrow. Just don't you dare back out. That's it. I am going to bed. I don't have the energy to get agitated anymore. My eyes are closing. Okay. Good night, buddy. I am off to bed too. Turning off the computer, I began to get ready for bed, involuntarily scrolling through various thoughts about the upcoming sortie in my head. In the morning, around 8 o'clock, I was awakened by a sharp ring at the door. Strange, Lenya and I had agreed to meet only at noon near my entrance. Quietly throwing on my home clothes, I tiptoed, trying not to make noise, crept up to the door and looked through the peephole. To my horror, on the threshold stood the very same neighbor who had noticed my intent gaze the night before. It seems she decided to deal with it today. Of course, I didn't open the door to the old woman. I knew perfectly well that then an extremely unpleasant conversation for an hour or two was waiting for me. Therefore, I just pretended that none of the adults were at home, and just as quietly trudged back to bed, to sleep off the remaining time before getting up. Lenya and I spent the whole day until the very evening guessing about the possible reasons for Baba Valya's nightly trips to the basement. I was inclined to think that insomnia simply torments the lonely woman, so she engages in meaningless wandering through her, so to speak, possessions. And my impressionable friend, meanwhile, suggested that the old woman was keeping someone locked up and, perhaps, even feeding them directly from a bucket. An absurd theory, isn't it? And so, finally, the very night came that prompted me to write this story. Today, Lenya and I decided to go out a little earlier so as not to attract unnecessary attention. Knowing Baba Valya, she is always on the alert and may suspect something is wrong at any moment. Going around the corner of the house opposite, we took a convenient position for observation and began to wait patiently for the appearance of the old woman, feeling like some kind of spies. I don't even remember how long we sat like that, maybe 20 or 30 minutes, but the neighbor, as if out of spite, still did not appear, making us terribly nervous. At the moment when we were already going to give up on everything and go home, I suddenly noticed the painfully familiar movements from the side of that very entrance. Well, finally, I already thought we would leave empty-handed. Well, Len, ready to move out? Are you even asking? Of course I am ready. I am already tired of sitting, you half-assed partisan. So, wait, she went into the basement. Well, now, in principle, we can go. Just don't make too much noise, okay? And we only turn on the flashlights when absolutely necessary. That's it, let us go, my friend said in a half-whisper and was the first to move towards the slightly open massive door leading to the -1st floor. Having slowly descended the steps into the gloomy dusty dungeon, in addition to the dampness usual for such places, I also caught a sharp unpleasant smell of iron, which I immediately attributed to rusty pipes. There were plenty of them around. We were guided almost by touch, holding on to each other. We didn't want to turn on the flashlights in such a tense situation for understandable reasons, which, by the way, greatly hindered movement. Soon we randomly turned into another corridor leading to a small dead end. At its end, An ajar iron door was visible, from behind which a dim orange light escaped, probably from a candle. As we approached this room, we began to hear a faint sound, as if someone was actively eating something, smacking their lips with pleasure. I perfectly understood that the source of this strange noise could in no way be our neighbor. The sounds coming from the room seemed too inhuman, but this did not stop us from continuing to move forward, towards the unknown lurking very close. Carefully creeping up to the door, Lenya and I began to listen attentively to every rustle coming from behind the iron barrier. At first, apart from the same disgusting smacking sounds, nothing else could be heard. At some point, I even assumed that the old woman simply decided to feed stray animals out of boredom, like cats, which there have always been plenty of here. However, soon the vile hoarse voice of Baba Valya was added to the already described noise, immediately putting everything in its place. Eat, son, eat. I'll bring more tomorrow. A heavy tremor ran through my entire body from what I heard. I could barely move, let alone force myself to leave this nightmare place. And who did she decide to feed raw meat to in the middle of the night? I frantically pondered, frozen in place as if rooted to the spot and afraid to breathe once more, so that we would not be heard. Perhaps we could have avoided an unpleasant meeting with the owner of those heart-rending sounds, if Lenya, by a cruel irony of fate, had not suddenly lost his balance and tumbled straight into the damn room. Involuntarily looking around the dimly lit room, I almost screamed from the fear that filled my soul. Next to the familiar elderly woman sat a terribly disfigured creature that only vaguely resembled a human. It greedily devoured pieces of raw meat from various parts of its body, shoved them into its mouth and happily chomped under the desperate cries of the victim. Some kind of dirty gray rags, similar to torn bed linen, were hanging on it, as well as chains, apparently designed to keep the creature from escaping. But what scared me the most about this monster was its monstrously disfigured face, completely covered with scars and other injuries. The creature's eyes were somewhere on the side, almost on the cheek, and there seemed to be no lips at all. Only by the look could one guess that this creature was once, probably, an ordinary person with whom something terrible had happened, dooming them to such grave consequences. The fall of my friend interrupted the awkward pause, forcing all those present to exchange glances. Little devils who like to eavesdrop must be punished. What do you think, son? The old woman hissed, looking affectionately at the same ugly creature. The creature, as if on cue, began to make monstrous sounds and joyfully jump from side to side, like a dog that had just heard the cherished walk from its owner. Unable to contain my emotions, I yelled at Lenya with all my might, "Run!" After which I abruptly turned around and rushed to the exit, trying to pull a flashlight out of my pocket on the go. As I ran, I heard only the ominous laughter of the old woman behind me, the clang of chains and the growl of the monster patiently waiting for its mistress to unlock the locks in order to rush after fresh and juicy prey. I don't know how I managed to get to the exit. I didn't manage to get the flashlight out in a hurry. Apparently, intuition and memory helped in a difficult moment, but it was not destined to leave well enough alone. Lenya was nowhere to be seen, as if he had disappeared into thin air, although literally a couple of minutes ago he seemed to be running after me. There was nothing to think about here. I definitely could not leave my friend to the mercy of fate, especially in such a terrible situation when he was left alone with a predatory monster in a dark basement. Resolutely stepping back and illuminating the enclosed space with the light of a flashlight, I began to quietly call for Lenya, hoping until the last that he had simply lost his way and nothing terrible had happened to him. But a loud scream that suddenly came from the side of that same dead end mercilessly shattered my hopes to smithereens. There were no thoughts left in my head except one: to help Lenya get out of this endless nightmare. I rushed like mad again, only now in the opposite direction, feverishly shining a flashlight in search of a familiar silhouette. And so, turning into another corridor to the sound, I involuntarily became a witness to a terrible picture that still pops up before my eyes even years later. Having pounced on Lenya, The vile monster tore off pieces of flesh from different parts of his body with its bare hands, shoved them into its mouth and happily chomped under the desperate screams of the victim. At that moment, I found nothing better than to recklessly rush into the attack, seeking to rescue my friend from the clutches of the bloodthirsty creature at any cost. But in my stupidity, I did not take into account one extremely important detail. The cruel monster turned out to be much more powerful than me. Therefore, as soon as I approached it to deliver the first blow, it was able to easily throw me aside. And with such force that for a moment it seemed to me as if my whole body was paralyzed with pain. At that moment, for some reason, I assumed the thought that this was probably the end. My head was buzzing like crazy. I could not even helplessly get to my feet, listening to the ominous laughter of the old woman, mixed with Lenya's unbearable screams. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was the male figure with a gun that suddenly appeared in my field of vision. Without thinking twice, he took 2 well-aimed shots right into the body of the ruthless monster, and it flew to the side, forever leaving this mortal world. I only came to my senses in the morning in the local hospital, thank God, safe and sound. I got away with nothing more than a little fright and a mild concussion, which is why, in fact, I lost consciousness. Our savior turned out to be a 60-year-old neighbor who lived in the same entrance as Baba Valya, right across from her apartment. Fortunately, that fateful night he was not sleeping and closely watched everything that was happening from the window. And when he saw 2 young guys go down to the basement following the old woman, he immediately realized, we had only a few minutes to live. That's what prompted the man to arm himself with a family rifle, and then go in pursuit of us. Obviously, he guessed who Baba Valya had been feeding raw meat to at night for many years. As I later learned from my neighbor, the elderly woman once had a son. As soon as he was born, doctors diagnosed him with a terrible disease, hemoglobin dependence, which was expressed in an irresistible desire to drink fresh blood. As often happens when you are not like everyone else, the boy began to be mercilessly bullied. The poor woman tried with all her might to protect him, but with each year the little one's ailment only progressed, which was very strongly reflected in his appearance. In the end, the desperate mother could not stand it and took her son away in an unknown direction, so no one ever saw him again. Some believed that the crazy woman had killed the sick boy, while others, on the contrary, assumed that Baba Valya had given him up to an orphanage so that she herself would no longer suffer. But the man himself, after a while, began to notice rather strange visits of the woman to the basement in the evening and at night, when there were fewer people on the street. The picture came together in his head by itself. However, the neighbor decided not to stir up the long-standing and painful wounds of the unfortunate old woman and leave everything as it is. Be that as it may, after the boy's disappearance, Baba Valya hated everyone and everything, especially children, whom she considered evil and absolutely inhuman. After everything that happened, the old woman was taken to a psychiatric hospital, because after the death of her little one, she completely lost her mind and no longer perceived the world around her in any way. Many in our yard, learning about this terrible story, could not come to their senses for a long time. Some even refused to return to their apartments, fearing that the evil spirit of the monster would now wander through the dark corners of the house. Despite my friend's numerous injuries, Lenya was still saved, and very soon, having fully recovered, he again continued to walk with me through the streets of his hometown, as if nothing had happened. That same night, law enforcement officers searched the room in which the creature, once an ordinary person, had lived for many years. It was equipped with a dirty bunk, probably serving as a bed, as well as numerous chains that made it possible to keep the monster within the room. But what struck the employees most was the huge number of old Soviet toys scattered throughout the room, as well as many gnawed bones of various animals, which, obviously, the caring mother fed her son daily. In the end, everyone in the yard drew certain conclusions for themselves. Some began to look more closely at their neighbors, trying to see hidden traits in them. Someone became less trusting and more wary of strangers, But we all understood the main thing. Sometimes a terrible secret can be hidden behind a completely decent facade, which is better not to stir up. Yes, after this incident, I was left with a good trauma for life. But at least I was able to learn one simple truth once and for all. It's better to sit at home at night in safety than to wander out of boredom, no one knows where, looking for adventures. Now, every time I want to go somewhere in the middle of the night, I remember that terrible basement, the eerie laughter of Baba Valya and the inhuman screams of her insane son. And any desire for adventures instantly disappears. Although, I must admit, doubts sometimes overcome me. What if we hadn't gone into that damned basement then? What if we had just turned around and gone home? Perhaps the tragedy could have been avoided. But what's done is done. You can turn back time and change everything. It remains only to live with this burden, without telling anyone about what you saw. Otherwise, they won't believe it, they will consider you crazy. Even Lenya, it seems, prefers not to remember those events. We never discuss them, but I know, they also haunt him in nightmares, just like me. However, life goes on. Gradually, the horrors of the past recede, remaining only a painful memory. But I know for sure, legends about bloody Granny Valya and her little monsters still circulate in our quiet town. Children scare each other with this story, and some even claim to have heard mystical sounds from the notorious basement. And as much as I would like to tell them that all this is just fiction, I can, because I know too well. There is a grain of truth in every fairy tale. And some of them are better not to check from personal experience. I hope my story will be useful to someone, not as an example to follow, but as a warning. Because there are still many abandoned basements and strange neighbors in the world. And who knows what secrets they hide. But believe me, there are things that are better not to know. Sometimes ignorance is a real blessing. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. And may God have mercy on you from meeting your own monsters, wherever they may be hiding. Well, friends, that concludes our horror portion today. But remember, the darkness is always around, and it is waiting for its time to remind you again. If you enjoyed tickling your nerves and dive into the world of mystery and mysticism, do not forget to put a like, comment and, of course, subscribe to the channel. After all, ahead of you awaits more chilling stories that make your blood run cold in your veins. Click on the bell to not miss new videos, and remember, sometimes the worst is what is hidden in silence. See you in the next installment. Unless, of course, you're afraid.